Collaboratory and the Roybal Centers. Dr. Susan Mitchell is a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and a senior scientist at Hebrew Senior Life's Hinda and Arthur Marcus Institute of Aging Research in Boston, where she directs the Palliative Care in Aging Research Center and co-directs the Interventional Studies in Aging. She's a geriatrician and a health services researcher, and her research focuses on improving outcomes for older patients with advanced illness, particularly those living with dementia. I'd also like to mention that Dr. Vince Moore is a co-PI with her. He's the professor of Health Services Policy and Practice and the Florence Pierce Grant Professor in the Brown University School of Public Health. Drs. Mitchell and Moore both lead the NIA Impact Collaboratory to build the nation's capacity to conduct pragmatic clinical trials of interventions embedded within the healthcare system for people living with dementia and their care partners. And one of the reasons we're so excited to be able to have this interaction and this presentation from Susan is because they sometimes get proposals or pilots that really require much further refinement or adaptation at earlier stages that they would like to discuss with us, the Roybals, and we hopefully will start to have successfully developed, adapted, refined, and ready for later stage behavioral interventions that then we could be discussing with our partners over at this collaboratory. So with that, welcome, Susan. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, on behalf of Vince Moore, I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to speak with this group and to discuss the synergies that Karina mentioned. More and more as I get involved, I realize that NIA is certainly a village, and it takes a village to move these interventions along the stage model, and we all need each other. Next slide, please. So Karina already described the mission of the NIA Impact Collaboratory, but I'll just repeat it again. It's to build the nation's capacity to conduct embedded pragmatic clinical trials of non-pharmacological interventions within healthcare systems for people living with dementia and their care partners. And we have an audacious vision, which is through this work to transform the delivery, quality, and outcomes of care for people living with dementia and their care partners by accelerating the testing and adoption of evidence-based interventions in healthcare systems. Next slide. So what's the background here? Many of you know the premise of embedded pragmatic clinical trials, but I'll just go over it again for the purposes of underscoring what the rationale for the Impact Collaboratory was. So these types of trials really aim to bridge research and clinical care. They are from the onset designed with stakeholder input. The intervention is meant to be integrated within the routine clinical flow of healthcare systems. The data, both for subject identification and outcome measurements, are typically gleaned from electronic health records or administrative data sets. They strive to involve participants who represent the typical patient or person in the community or healthcare system, and not sort of cherry pick those with typical of an efficacy trial. And the outcomes typically are outcomes that are important to decision makers and will drive decisions, and are typically, again, gleaned using pragmatic methods through electronic healthcare systems or databases. Next slide. So many of you know that the NIH many years ago, a decade ago or so, set up the NIA Healthcare Systems Collaboratory, which has done an amazing job of moving the field of embedded pragmatic trials forward and really enhanced our capacity. Vince and I were lucky enough to work with the Healthcare Systems Collaboratory on a project. But I think as the work progressed, there was realization that really embedded pragmatic clinical trials in dementia required special focus. Why? We're in very special healthcare systems that are unique, such as nursing homes, assisted living, home health, etc., hospice. the data sources from which we glean our patient characteristics and outcomes are kind of special. A lot of Medicare claims, but also special data sets like the minimum data set in nursing homes, the OASIS data set for home care. There are certainly very special regulatory and ethics concerns in conducting these projects in this vulnerable population, issues around consent and other regulatory issues. Outcomes are kind of special because they're very particular outcomes that are of importance to people living with dementia and their care partners and for the healthcare systems that take care of them. There's certainly specialized methodologies requiring for ascertaining these outcomes from these data sets. In terms of design and stats, these trials typically are cluster randomized trials, but there's the special dyadic nature that needs to be taken into consideration, that being between the patient or person living with dementia and their care partner, and lots of loss to follow up due to death and other things. And finally, for regards to implementation, we're implementing often complex interventions in very challenger settings, and of course, adherence and fidelity are an ongoing challenge. Next slide. So with that, this U54 call for proposals went out, and Vincent and I were lucky enough to become the PIs of this NIA Impact Collaboratory. And being a U54, this is a cooperative agreement with the NIA. This was the funding was initiated only last September, although it certainly feels like a lot longer. Next slide. So to achieve our mission, we have several foci, really are the aims of our project. Our infrastructure is to develop and disseminate technical policy and best practices for doing these trials. A major focus is enhancing research development through a very robust pilot program that the aim of which is to really usher pilots for EPCTs through using rigorous methods such that by the end of that their pilot year, they'll be really able to transform into full-scale pragmatic trials. And also to be a resource for NIA-funded investigators who want to conduct these trials and want to build the capacity in the national the pipeline for these types of investigators. We certainly need to catalyze engagements among our stakeholders. This is done through our stakeholder engagement team as well as a healthcare systems core, and really underscoring that the research needs to be culturally tailored in order to include people from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. Next slide. This is the governance structure of it. As I mentioned, this is a U54, and so we're grateful for our project officer, Partha Bhattacharya, and our two project scientists, Lisa Onken and Marcel Salive. There's a lot of synergy between the Roybals. A few to mention is Scott Halpern is on our steering committee, Kevin Volp is on our external advisory committee. As I mentioned, Lisa is one of our project scientists, so lots of interaction. We have a very busy and talented administrative management core that's divided between Hebrew Senior Life, where I am, and Brown University, where Vince is. And we have 8 working groups and teams, all of which represent the essential components that need to be optimized to conduct a embedded pragmatic trial. Next slide. So this is a very large initiative on all those, filling in all those squares that you saw on our org chart are many, many people. These are lead scientists, investigators across the nation with expertise in this area. Each of those cores and teams typically have a leader as well as anywhere from 3 to 6 executive members to do the job. And so this is lots of people involved, big community. Next slide. So in terms of our real synergy with the Roybals, so as you all know better than I am, Scott's wrote a very funny thing in the chat box. The Roybal centers are really incubators through stage 0 through 4 in the stage model, and really lay the groundwork for larger dementia care provider interventions. So you can see the little Roybal sign on stage 0 to 4 here, but only the impact is really only on stage 4. We really are meant to be a launch pad for the development and implementation of stage 4 pragmatic clinical trials embedded into healthcare systems. So as mentioned, really, in some ways you can think about as the Roybal initiatives and pilots as being a pipeline that hopefully will progress across these stages and be ready to come to us perhaps for a pilot study that would lead to a full-scale pragmatic trial. Next slide. So the pilot project program is a main activity of impact. So far we've had in the short time one full cycle, and our second cycle was split into 2A, 2B. So we've had 3 full RFAs. Our real goal is over the next few years is to really have about 8 of these projects running a year. The cap is $200K per year, and again, underscore they're really preliminary data needed to set up for a full-scale EPCT, and they really need to pretty much have gone through the rigor of the prior stages to be ready for a pilot here. Again, targeting non-pharmacological interventions require at least 2 healthcare systems. And one unique thing about impact is as we select, there's a 2-stage process where we ask for an LRI, and then we have invite some of those LOIs to move forward. We have a very active assistance from our cores and teams for those moving forward to full proposals to try to really maximize the rigor and robustness in the pragmatic design. We have learned from our first cycle and ongoing is that there's a lot of confusion, naivete about what constitutes a pragmatic trial, and I would call this optimistically an opportunity to hone the field and really improve the methodologies and hopefully the quality of these trials. Move forward. Next slide. This is just an example of our cycle 2A, which came up smack dab in the middle of the COVID peak in April, May. So we focused it on prioritizing interventions that were largely telehealth or remote health. We got 39 letters of intent. We invited 10 full proposals, which went through our consultation process. And in that process, actually, several of those proposals dropped out, I think, because they realized that maybe they weren't as ready as they thought for the stage that we were targeting. And we have our study section soon to choose our next set. But you can see they run the gamut of different types of interventions and different settings that care for people living with dementia. Next slide. We also have a very big training mandate. Again, this was underscored on our first cycle of pilots realizing how much work there needed to be done to train investigators to become investigators to become skilled in this type of trial. So we have accelerated our career development award program through our training core and had our first RFA for the CDAs in June. We will be running a full training workshop and retreat in April, and I'll explain in a minute that we will welcome outside applicants to come to that training workshop. And we've recently lined what we hope is a growing curriculum of online training modules called Impact 101. I'll show you a slide on those in just a second. Next slide. This is Impact 101. These are generated from our cores. Right now we have 6 up, but we'll have 9 soon, and 18 probably up in the next few months. Really meant to be a curriculum for from the basics of conducting an EPCT for people living with dementia. They're really good. They're 15 minutes long. We purposely did this so that people would be able to maintain focus. They all have a structured format and very easily digestible. So if some of your trainees or investigators are interested in learning more, this is a resource that's freely available on our website. And again, we're looking forward to Impact 201 or 102, whichever way you want to look at it. And over the years, we'll continue to augment this library of training modules. Next slide. These are our two CDA awardees just this year, both of whom really are have mentees that are within the Collaboratory, but we really encourage you guys to think about people that might be good candidates for this. We have another cycle and request for proposals coming up in February. These are 2 years, 100K per year. I guess you could consider targeting sort of a pre-traditional K award, or even someone who's a little bit more senior but pivoting towards EPCTs as their focus. Next slide. So really, I see several areas of synergies. I think we are all in the business of promoting translational aspects of intervention development. We are particularly focused on dementia, so maybe particularly relevant to those Roybal centers with that focus as well. As Karina said earlier, I think this relationship should be bi-directional. We just reviewed our current set of LOIs that came in, and there were at least a handful, at least a couple that we wrote back to, that we didn't accept, but we wrote back to them and said, you may be good for a different NIA mechanism, such as a Roybal, because you're a little bit too upstream in your development right now. And I really hope you guys keep the impact in mind in terms of referring interventions that you know of that may be ready for the next step towards a pragmatic trial. In terms of knowledge and training, we will be running this more to come on a training workshop in April, 1.5 days for junior investigators mostly, but again, maybe more senior pivoting to EPCTs. It'll be 1.5 days, and we'll pull out, we're going to be putting out a call for external applicants for this workshop. There's the CDA's award that I mentioned, the online training resources, and you're all welcome certainly to attend our impact grand rounds, which occur monthly on a large webinar format. And as I mentioned, I've been really enjoying the bi-directional leadership between many folks that overlap between Impact and the Roybal Centers. I'm learning a lot from those folks that I mentioned earlier, and I look forward to integrating our efforts together. So I think that is my last slide. Yep.
Terrific. Thank you, Susan. That was great. I see a couple of questions, well, at least one for you. The question is from David. Are the pilot projects through the Roybals or the separate RFAs? David, we may need you to type a little more to understand your question.
Maybe if you're asking the pilot projects I described through Impact are run through Impact. It goes through Impact, yes. And it's not through the Roybals. It's a separate mechanism.
Exactly. And as Susan said, what we're really trying to launch, we hope, is that some of the Roybals may get LOIs or hear from people who want to do functionally an EPCT. We're hoping they'll direct them to the NIA Collaboratory. We also hope that people will be getting successfully developed interventions that then in later years can go to the NIA Collaboratory, and we're hoping that they will be directing to us those interested investigators who in fact require earlier stage work before they're ready to be considered. I especially appreciate you showing us the training materials that you have, Susan. We'll certainly cross-post on our website. We've already been sending out in our newsletter your webinars and hearing from people that they're very useful.
Great, thank you. And we can do the same. We have a great communications team, and so if there's things that you want to broadcast through us, just shoot me an email and I'll make it happen. Okay, well, we're just setting up for many of our Roybals to be, for those who advertise for their upcoming pilot applications. So great. When we have those, we'll cross-post. Super.
Okay, seeing no further questions.